The song of death is sweet and endless. But what is this? Somewhere in the sore, bloated man-meat around you. A sensation.
I gotta admit that I did not expect this. I've been following the development of Disco Elysium since it was first announced, back when it was still called No Truce with the Furies. And what got me hooked by it back then was its elevator pitch. I've always been a fan of Black Isle's Infinity Engine games, Baldur's Gate, Icewind Dale, and of course the unusurped King Planescape Torment, and by extension the genre of RPGs that evolved from it, while admittedly always having been not so fond of its brand of possible real-time combat and its heavy emphasis on it as a central challenge. That of course always comes down to taste. If this blend of tabletop-inspired role-playing and real-time combat is what you're in the mood for, then these games are the bee's knees. But I personally always dreamed of having a game in which not nearly every quest would eventually culminate in a real-time strategy encounter somewhere down the line. While there's nothing wrong with that, I've always felt that the default reliance on this design pattern hamstrings the writing in these games in a way, since it bottlenecks quests and storylines into a predetermined goal with only so much narrative wiggle room. Regardless of setting, story, and general quest design, it has to evoke a casus belli, a justification to regularly steer players into violent confrontations. This default reliance on combat as a central gameplay challenge inevitably renders even outstanding writing predictable in some ways. What I've always wanted was an RPG that's, at heart, clearly cut from the Infinity Engine cloth, but that completely omits combat altogether. A game where it's not one of the central tenets of narrative design that you play as someone who constantly ends up murdering people in battle. And No Truce with the Furies, while it was still in development, promised to deliver exactly that. A traditional, open-world role-playing game inspired by Infinity classics without simulated combat as a central gameplay element, but a true role-playing game that instead focuses entirely on storytelling. And the thing is, this premise was already more than enough for me to want this game bad. So my expectations and hopes for the final game were generous, and I approached it with an easy-to-please mindset. If Disco Elysium would have solely delivered this, with a solid but in no way mind-blowing story, characters, and overall execution, it would already have made an entry in my evergreens simply for doing that. But what Disco Elysium ended up delivering was light years beyond my wildest expectations. Not even for a second did I anticipate loving this game as much as I do now, after finally getting my hands on it and spending dozens of hours with it. Ever since the first half hour already, it's been hard for me to stop thinking or even shutting up about it. So here I am, realizing that I simply have to make a video on it, for at least two reasons. First, I don't want anyone to miss out on it, because it is a fantastic and absolutely charming title made by a small, passionate team of indie developers in Estonia, and they just deserve all the support in the world. And secondly, this is also a bit of a cathartic exercise for me, as I can finally get all my overflowing thoughts and musings on this astounding role-playing masterpiece out of my system. Now in this video, I'm going to try to avoid spoilers as much as I can. This is not a story dissection, but an examination on many of the reasons why I believe that this game is absolutely outstanding in pretty much every way, and why people should play it. That said, I will show some in-game examples here and there to better illustrate my points. So if you want to play this game completely spoiler-free, then you should stop here and trust me that it is, in fact, an absolute masterpiece that is 100% worth your time. Play it and then come back once you've experienced it for yourself. Whenever you see people discuss the best CRPGs ever made, there's a certain inner circle of titles that will invariably be mentioned. These games often don't even mechanically adhere to the same set of rules, yet what makes them so universally beloved when it comes to video game RPGs is that their worlds feel arguably the most alive and believable, their characters and branching narratives are the most reactive, and they give the player the most freedom to express their own character in as many ways as possible. In short, those are the games that are generally considered to come the closest to what makes playing a tabletop RPG so engaging. Yet there is this general consensus that it is virtually impossible to make a video game that truly feels like playing a tabletop RPG, simply because a storyteller, or dungeon master, we'll just say DM from now on, has the ability to improvise the story on the fly to create situations, characters, and locations as it unfolds. If a video game were to accurately emulate that, it would either have to develop an incredibly advanced artificial intelligence, or the designers would have to write every single possible contingency, every little choice the players could come up with in advance, wouldn't they? And that's, of course, practically impossible. Yet Disco Elysium is a game that doesn't just feel like something that's inspired by the limitless freedom of tabletop RPGs. It's the first video game that, to me, truly feels like there's an actual DM leading you through the story. Disco Elysium, while playing like an Infinity Engine game, makes me feel like I'm playing a tabletop RPG right now, and it achieves this in several different ways. It does, as far as it can, try to go the latter of the two routes I just mentioned. Disco Elysium's world feels several times more densely written and jam-packed than any RPG I've ever played before. In reality, I don't even think that the common idea that to emulate the feeling of a tabletop RPG in a video game, you'd have to preemptively write every possible narrative contingency, therefore it is virtually impossible, holds a lot of truth to it. Experienced DMs know that while players will be assholes and wander freely and have the tendency to constantly do exactly the opposite of your masterfully plotted grand epic plan, a good DM needs to be able to A. gently steer the players towards the grand narrative, while B. making them feel like they're doing it all on their own accord, and C. like they're having all the freedom imaginable. Disco Elysium lives by these principles. For one, it fills its world with so many interactions and possibilities that players will constantly feel like they're doing all the legwork, while in actuality, it's all carefully laid out for them. One of the core ways by which it manages to fool players into getting that DM feeling is its unparalleled, attentive, and responsiveness to the player's behavior. If you're a serious type of player who shies away from sillier choices and approaches the game rather methodically, encounters and conversations end up much less chaotic than when you play a character who decides to go haywire with playful, daring, or just outright ludicrous choices. That's generally how the mood of the play naturally evolves during a campaign. The setting itself gives an indication, but depending on how silly or earnest players interact, the DM, if they're not throwing a tantrum because it doesn't go the way they envisioned, will ideally roll with it and tailor the narrative and the experience around it. Disco Elysium does just that. It indulges your mood. You can play the cold and methodical detective and the game will still be chaotic, true, but not nearly as much as when you choose to fully embrace its chaos. There's this moment where you and your partner look at a wall full of bullet holes and your partner nods, to which you can nod back, which your partner replies to with nodding again. And if you're feeling cocky and silly, you can keep nodding harder and harder until you eventually break your neck from nodding. Yes, you can die from trying to out-nod your partner in this game. But most people probably won't. Nodding like this is a strand of the branching narrative where the quote-unquote DM plays along with more tongue-in-cheek behavior. I know 100% that if I were leading a Vampire the Masquerade campaign and two of the players were having a good time nodding back and forth harder and harder, I would eventually let them roll composure plus athletics and gradually up the difficulty level if they keep nodding. And we'd have a good laugh. I rarely see things like this in other RPGs, simply because they feel so far out of the range of possibilities you'd expect implemented in a video game. When you find something like this in most games, it's the exception, and often one that people highlight for years as one of the coolest moments in gaming. In Disco Elysium, it's not the exception. This is how a vast majority of encounters and dialogues are designed, by default. Which brings me to the skill checks. I've never seen role-playing skill checks pulled off better in a video game. Most RPGs include skill checks, not unlike their tabletop siblings, but in most cases the die roll is completely automated and hidden from the player. You sometimes have something like a console where you might read up on past rolls and how they were calculated, but the checks are designed in such a way that the players don't have to care for them at all. It all runs in the background. I do understand this decision for optimization of flow, but there is a certain satisfactory element to knowing which number you have to surpass, then accumulating your skill points, and then casting the dice to see the result unfold right before your eyes. Most games take this simple gamble element completely out of the equation, and skill checks and dialogues are in many cases often completely reduced to, do you have enough points or a certain ability? Then it becomes available. Otherwise, it's not.
Oh, well, it's a little different, but entirely possible.
Disco Elysium does the opposite, and relishes the skill check with so much playfulness and creativity. Regularly, you'll find yourself in situations where you have to roll for one of your many skills, and the outcome of the encounter changes whether you succeed or fail. And the beautiful part is, Disco Elysium is finally a game that fully embraces the joy of a bad roll. I've said that numerous times in past videos, that a good DM knows how to make even bad rolls, or often the bad roll specifically, so interesting that you don't shy away from trying an impossible check. From getting a little playful with your character. Embracing some chaos and creativity in your choices instead of always just min-maxing for the best outcome. And most video game RPGs simply don't embrace this possibility fully. Not even close to the degree Disco Elysium does. Even in my favorite RPGs of all time, I still largely play with the mentality that I want to mostly avoid failure when I can, because at the end of the day, it will lead to a net penalty. Disco Elysium, on the other hand, is the first game that, within the first half hour or so, strongly makes it clear that failed skill checks will lead to incredibly fun and interesting situations. It only took a good 10 minutes for me to get to the point where my character, just woken up with a severe hangover that he's forgotten literally everything, gets asked for his name. Which is when he realized that this is the ideal chance to come up with a really darn cool name for himself. So you have the option, and I say the option because you can be a square and just be honest about having forgotten your name. You get the option to roll a conceptualization check to come up with a really awesome name. And what can I say? I do not regret in the slightest to have critically failed that check. Because when my sense of conceptualization, full of determination, came back with the name Raphael Ambrosius Cousteau, it was the second time that the game had me in stitches. Another thing that strongly adds to the feeling of having an actual storyteller lead you through the campaign is that the narrator guiding you through the conversations and encounters doesn't feel dry and neutral like in most games, but like an actual person. You will spend a vast majority of the game in the right side of the screen where the quote-unquote action, the reading, takes place. On a side note, it's also worth mentioning how great of a UI design choice it is to render the text in this narrow, vertically laid out format in a text-heavy CRPG compared to the traditional wide panel style we're used to. This narrow, fast-to-read 5 to 9 words layout makes long stretches of text feel similar to read as tabloid newspapers, since it's much easier and especially faster, and therefore far more comfortable to read over long stretches of time. And the content you're reading is, start to finish, so vivid and reliably and enthrallingly written that it never gets boring. And yes, you've seen that right. In the example from before, your sense of conceptualization actually did directly talk with you. This is one of those absolute strokes of genius in this game, that all your skills are all actual personas. They're characters in your mind that have actual conversations with you in your head, and they quite often come in conflict with each other. Your sense of empathy might not necessarily agree with the opinion of your sense of authority, and they will let each other know. It's amazing how much this adds to the characterization of the game's protagonist, who is, no matter how you twist and turn it, the absolute definition of a truly chaotic character in D&D alignment matrix terms. Your choices will mostly affect what kind of chaotic character he turns out to be in the end, but this never feels like a restriction. Yeah, you probably won't be playing the much despised lawful good paladin type, nor will you end up role-playing your protagonist into a perfectly neutral automaton or something like that. But which RPG really gives you that range? The range that Disco Elysium allows players to define their own version of Raphael Ambrosius Cousteau is nothing short of astounding. And it strongly speaks for the game's excellent writing and sense of character development that this protagonist is Someone I probably would never have assembled for myself, nor chosen to play if I had to select him from a cast of possible choices. It's just too far off from my usual flavor. But the fact that only after about an hour or two into the game, I felt like I knew not just this guy, but even his ancient reptilian brain and his limbic system far better than I know either the protagonist or any of the party members in Pillars of Eternity, which I think is a great game for the record, after 50 hours of play. I find myself incurably infected by his chaotic energy, relishing to regularly go for the most zany dialogue choices and getting all bubbly and excited when I face a skill check that looks like it's extremely unlikely for me to win. And then surprisingly end up rolling a critical success and getting an unexpectedly great outcome nonetheless. You can die and you can fail checks in this game, but no matter how bad you roll, or how low your skills are, you won't avoid interesting, fun, and outright hilarious situations and outcomes. One thing that you'll immediately notice while playing Disco Elysium is that the branching narrative in this game is unbelievably complex and wide-reaching. And that's often true even for single, self-contained dialogues, where dozens of different clauses and deviations from the dialogue tree occur depending on the quality of your skills, your choices, and potential interludes of your character traits. As an example, let's say you're talking with a person who is hiding something from you. Depending on your drama skill, you might or might not pick up on it, which will influence the dialogue options you have available. There are singular dialogue encounters that are so complex and multi-layered that I imagine the flowchart must look like the neural scan of brain synapses. And we haven't even taken into account how the game reacts to everything. Well, it's of course not possible that it literally reacts to everything, but man, it is mind-blowing how many things Disco Elysium keeps track of and notices, no matter where or when you are in the game. You remember my terrible name roll from earlier, right? Rafael Ambrosius Cousteau. This is one possible outcome of the What's Your Name encounter. But yet the game, if I want to, lets me introduce myself as Monsieur Cousteau pretty much through the entire rest of the game, in dozens of conversations that give me this option to remain steadfast about my invented name. But hey, I am Rafael Ambrosius Cousteau. No one can tell me I'm not. It's my choice. And that's honestly just a comparably simple and straightforward example. Anywhere in dialogues, external influences like tiny, seemingly unimportant choices you make, often in completely unrelated dialogues before, as well as, for instance, clothes you're wearing, thoughts you're having, more on that later, or items you're carrying, the game regularly picks up on it. And this reactivity never feels tokenized, like as if the game just wants to impress you with how much it picks up on. It pretty much always makes sense in the context and adds something meaningful to the situation. Like, at some point my character was still wearing garden gloves, for instance, because I needed a boost on my interfacing skill during a check a few minutes before, so I ended up forgetting to take them off, even though it looked admittedly ridiculous. But then in a conversation where I pondered with my partner about our careers as police officers, I was contemplating a hobby that would add some color to my life, when he notices the garden gloves on my hands and suggests gardening as a hobby. And he meant it. This bit of conversation wasn't remotely close to when I got the garden gloves, or related to the situation where I needed them for that interfacing skill check. It's an interjection that probably 80% or more of players will not get, but that type of reactivity permeates the entire game. Your character and those you talk with react to things like your ideological leanings. Oh yeah, this game is highly political. Are you a giant communist?
We have a right to work! Besides, we're not that different.
Or do you walk the dark path of fascism? But you know, you're of course not just a racist. You've read books. Or maybe you are, Dios mío, a liberal! It's up to you. But seriously, this is a game written with so many incredibly sharp, witty, and intelligent lines with such a frequency that it's next to impossible to even keep up. It's that game where a character just en passant remarks how capital has the ability to subsume all critiques into itself, so that even those who critique it end up reinforcing it instead, and then just continues with the dialogue. And the interjection is not shoehorned, it perfectly fits the moment and hits the nail on the head. There's many different ideologies clashing in Disco Elysium, and exploring this, while contributing to it yourself, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, it's a big part of what makes it so captivating. Another truly fascinating aspect to me is that this incredible density and reactivity originates in the game's necessity to establish the alternative core engagement to the ubiquitous combat challenge RPGs usually employ as a means of friction. What a sentence. This goes so far that when an RPG delivers a non-combat option, it usually wants immediate pats on the shoulder, while Disco Elysium goes much further and handles it all with meaningful and interesting role-playing challenges within its dialogue trees to create compelling interactions and challenges. Like, when you're talking to Everard Clare, the Union boss, you'll face an adversary, or ally, who is incredibly strong at subterfuge and verbal intimidation. Every other game would have somehow muddled him into a boss fight, but Disco Elysium turns conversations with him into a branching narrative confrontation, a puzzle even, that makes you directly feel his verbal superiority over you. Not through stats, but through the way he's written and leads you through the conversation. Like, he insists that you take a seat on a ridiculously uncomfortable chair in front of him, with an intimidating persistence that you are only able to resist if you pass a pretty difficult volition skill check. Sitting on this chair then makes you gradually lose health during the conversation, while this well-informed man uses intimidating information on you, gathered from his many sources, to make you seriously uncomfortable. You're gonna fall apart and see your sanity just melt away right in front of him. It's okay to cry, just let it all out, man. This is a boss encounter, but without chopping each other to bits in real-time strategy fight with spells and shit, but in a conversation. It feels so refreshing as an RPG challenge. It's what made something like the final encounter in Fallout 1, for instance, so memorable and genius.
Mr. Dubois, are you okay? Can I get you a glass of water or something? Are you having some kind of medical emergency?
Now, just as you'd expect, in Disco Elysium you also gain XP over time and can increase your skills gradually, and, as I said, buff yourself with clothes that support and often also negatively impact certain skills. But another stroke of genius, storytelling-wise, is that, yes, every skill gets nominally better the more points you put into it, but every single skill can also become too strong. With a high level of empathy, for instance, most games would exclusively give the player advantages based on their deeper compassion for people. However, in Disco Elysium, you can become so empathetic that other people's suffering makes you cry their tears and punch holes in walls because you make their anger your own, and potentially even make you lose sanity in the process, or health if the wall turns out to be harder than your knuckles. This creates so many fascinating storytelling opportunities, and you might have noticed extends the already ridiculously far-reaching branching narrative even further across the game. This approach solves this age-old RPG problem that especially Elder Scrolls games are known for, namely that the players eventually become Swiss Army knives that literally can do everything without any trade-offs, making the already empty shell of a protagonist feel even more like a complete cardboard power fantasy. That can be, fun to play, sure, but storytelling-wise, it's just really boring. To top it all off, Disco Elysium also brings the Thoughts system, an additional passive progression system that fits the tone and direction of the game like a glove. Basically, you have several slots that you can assign thoughts in the back of your mind to, that your character passively ponders upon while time passes. You know that effect when you have a certain something on the tip of your tongue? But the much harder you think on it, the more it evades your grasp. Yet after a couple of hours, you'll suddenly yell the word, but completely out of context, and people will give you confused looks. No? Is that just me? It's basically that, but with thoughts and musings about all kinds of stuff, from where do I actually live, to where does this inexplicable feminist agenda in my mind come from, to the truly riveting questions such as, how do I get my shit together? Oh yeah, you can potentially also ponder about what it means to be Detective Raphael Ambrosius Cousteau, if you remain persistent that that is in fact your name. But only if you failed that what's your name conceptualization check in the beginning. After several in-game hours, then you will have resolved your thought and can keep them in your mind map, which will lead to certain, oftentimes interesting stat bonuses and alterations, and also can influence dialogue strongly. Like, getting your shit together will make you finally be able to inspect that corpse you're supposed to without repeatedly vomiting on your shoes, and the Mazovian socioeconomics, the game universe's equivalent to Marxism, will make all left-wing dialogue options reward you with XP.
Critical theory
But you'll also lose some authority for being a downtrodden Inva communist, and your visual calculus skill suffers because you see reaction
everywhere.
As I just mentioned, Disco Elysium plays in an alternate history setting in an era that is, if you compare it with our timeline, oftentimes a little anachronistic. Parts of Revachol and Martinez feel like you're sometime in an equivalent of our 70s or 80s, while other parts feel distinctly older. The world building of the game's setting comes along with a surprisingly deep and fleshed out world geography, history, and geopolitical constellation. And this grand setting makes the world you're playing in feel considerably larger than it actually physically is. And yes, the game is an open world, and I say that with the fondest inclination possible. I've made it repeatedly clear in the past that I'm skeptical about many of the common trends in modern video game open world design. The Ubisoft approach that has branched out from Assassin's Creed and influenced so much of what we now understand when we hear open world is, to me, in big parts a collection of lazy filler content. The way these worlds are crafted, despite looking lavish and gorgeous on the surface, often tend to feel like a shallow theme park experience to me, and not in a good way, designed to primarily put players in a state of constant flow, neither over nor under challenging. An abundance of categorized items pointing to categorized activities, categorized mission types, categorized genetic side activities, and of course, categorized meaningless loot, collectibles, and unlockables everywhere. Mass-produced, highly streamlined content meant to cost-effectively stretch out the playtime of a game. But even with the genuinely great examples of the genre, like Assassin's Creed Origin, or heck, the 97 Metascore wonder Red Dead Redemption 2, I keep growing so frustrated and impatient over time, towards being knowingly compelled to finish all this meaningless excess in order for my brain to achieve this conditioned feeling of getting to a reward this design pattern makes me seek out. I think this type of open world design is garbage, and the fact that it's so common makes an open world like the one in Disco Elysium feel so much more rewarding and refreshing to explore. Now, if you'd compare its plain dimensions with a big-budget, AAA action-adventure a la Red Dead Redemption 2, you'll find that Disco Elysium is comparably tiny. But this game populates its world with a peerless density of diverse and reliably interesting content that it took me a good 12 hours of playtime or so to even realize that the world itself is not that big in the first place.
Everything's still cool here, officer.
Like, for the first 2 in-game days, which take quite a bit of time, I never even reached the boundaries of the overworld, if you can call it that. And that's not because it's freakishly massive or anything. I tried it out. If you run from the northernmost tip of the peninsula all the way down across the waterlock and up along the dock until Joyce Messier's boat, you'll cover the longest distance across the overworld map in about 2 minutes or so. But, of course, you have to take dozens of lavishly rendered locations which you can enter into account. And altogether, this encompasses an estimated 50 to 100 rooms, all in all. So I'd rather describe the game's open world as intricate rather than massive in dimensions. There was so much interesting stuff to discover and interact with that kept me engaged that I spent hours upon hours in dialogue and investigation trees just with that small area that my mind initially felt intimidated by how huge this open world must be. Meaning, before I decided to just walk from border to border, I kept thinking that Disco Elysium's world is immense. And I still think this is true, simply because there is so much more to a cohesive and enthralling open world than just square footage. As we've said, it's next to impossible to fully emulate a real DM by pre-writing every possible scenario even the most silly player characters would even come up with, but Disco Elysium comes so unbelievably close to filling every inch of its beautiful locations with so much interaction potential that you'll never even think of the boundaries. There's always something to do. This is a game where you can visit a bookstore and you can damn well be sure that you'll find an abundance of books to buy, read, skim through, interact with, and spend deep inner monologue branching narrative excursions in. And hey, while we're in the bookstore, of course it has a board game section, in which you can buy a family-friendly tabletop game where you build a civilization and then go on to brutally colonize and repress other civilizations. And of course you can buy the game and read the package, unwrap it, read the manual, inspect the cards and pieces, and then go on and play it. It is completely optional, but as with all the side activities in this game, it ends up being a thoroughly enjoyable interaction with your partner while delivering a contextually fitting, sharp critique of common problematic board game tropes. Oh, and of course there's also an in-universe tabletop RPG. Why wouldn't there be? So I'll say it again, this game is so jam-packed with interesting, brilliantly written content that I can guarantee it's well worth your time. And you're gonna spend a lot of time in it. Nothing in this game even once felt like mass-produced filler content, but it's packed to the brim with unique, fresh, and enticing bits of interactive narrative that I'm seriously running out of words to properly praise it for that.
And now, the conclusion.
Now, have I deceived you, clickbaited you with the bold claim on the thumbnail of this video that Disco Elysium is the literally best CRPG? No, I haven't. I stand by this. I stan, how the youth say these days. Admittedly, I've been wrestling with myself for quite a while when I was playing the game because I kept having this desire to say, this is seriously the best RPG I've ever played, but I didn't quite dare to speak it out because it's such a bold claim, you know? But the more I thought about it, the more I felt that, yes, in a literal sense, in the original semantic meaning of the term RPG, role-playing game that harks back to the tabletop, there is not a single game that made me feel more like I'm feeling during a tabletop campaign. And this is not an average, bog-standard campaign. This is a good campaign.
This is a good campaign. A good campaign. A good campaign. This is a good campaign. This is a good campaign. This is good campaign.
Yes, as a role-playing game, to me personally, it surpasses even all those greats that I can never shut up about, like Planescape, New Vegas, Bloodlines, Arcanum, Mask of the Betrayer, so that I can say that, yep, Disco Elysium is, to me, in fact, literally the best CRPG I've ever played. And I'm convinced that people will still talk about it in a decade from now and longer. And I'm also sure I'll come back to it time and again because there are so many different ways in which the story unfolds. This story will really go down a completely different path if you play the game differently. What a year, honestly. Not one, but two amazing titles by small developers that ended up being decidedly in my list of the best video games I've ever played. By Pathologic 2. But aside from that, what's the conclusion here? What's the lesson? The way I see it, Disco Elysium is yet another example of a game that greatly benefits from rejecting long-established, rigid genre conventions, namely the use of traditional combat as the central vessel for challenge, and instead charting a different path to answer the questions of how else to engage the player in meaningful and captivating ways. And by daring to take a path that's, compared to the beaten one, much less explored, it benefits from such a tremendous pool of untapped possibilities and ideas, and it excessively scoops from that pool. When we tend to follow the beaten path, we also tend to become rigid and close ourselves off to the possibilities of truly groundbreaking innovation in favor of imitating what's already there. It's the law of the instrument. If your only tool is a hammer, then every problem looks like a nail. Disco Elysium, by both rejecting combat and realizing this decision with an open mind for experimentation and a stubborn will to deliver something equally, if not even more compelling than what we've grown accustomed to, it's the model recipe for unexpected brilliance. But what I truly want is this to be an inspiration. I don't want it to make ripples, but waves across the video game RPG genre. I want Disco Elysium to be a beacon that brightly signals to designers out there that making an RPG that feels like you're playing a tabletop is, despite years of arguing for its impossibility, in fact very achievable. The game is critically highly acclaimed, and so far I've honestly read almost nothing but glowing praise from press and fans alike, which makes me hopeful that it ends up turning some heads. I want this game's bold and daring design and writing philosophy to upheave and transform how we think about RPGs. I want Disco Elysium to be the game that instigates the long overdue semantic RPG revolution. I want this game to be the example that people bring up to argue that the term role-playing game, in the context of video games, should not anymore refer to progression systems and XP bars shoehorned into genres that have nothing to do with the origin of the word. I wanted to reclaim the term RPG to once again describe video games in which you actually role-play. Hey, thanks for watching and sticking with me all the way. So the videos that I make are, for the biggest part, funded by my supporters over on Patreon, and I love them for it. Crowdfunding has been what enabled me to do this for years now, and I'm thankful for that. So if you feel like helping me out as well to make sure that the boat doesn't sink to the depths of YouTube's algorithm ocean, you can follow the link that just popped up in the top right, or the one in the description to pitch in as well, and you'll have my gratitude for it. You also get access to my monthly in-depth production blog and my Patreon-only Discord server. Get to see videos 1 to several days before release. You can get access to my scripts while I'm in the middle of writing them, and you can get your name in the credits of each video as a thank you for your contribution. This month, a special thanks goes out to my biggest communism builders, Andrew Hines, Evan Tickler, Arnie, Sophie Powelson, Chuck Taylor, Thwagam, Nathan O'Connor, Sven Bischoff, Caspar Ram, Adriel Garcia, Chrissy, Terry Collins, Pablo Arcelas, Quentin Podom, Hunter Crawford and Margaret Strawn, Norbert Gerard Matinka, Heraklit, Christian, Gehennas, Ty McCandless, Dimitar Slutkov, Billy Lott, Agustin Ortega, Kevin H. Yang, Jin Hansen, Malim, Mura Casardes, Laird Wakala, Wobbles and Peen the Wonder Ducks, Lawrence E. Buben, Kenan Ward aka Legolas Katarn, and Wang Vu. Until next time, ta-ta!